Hello, and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. Feel free to share my videos as much as you like, because the purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues and any issues related to those issues. A hearty shout out to the Rabyd Nation. Join the nation by hitting that subscribe button. And if you want to become a paying citizen of the Rabyd Nation, hit the join button and your options will be presented. Today I want to continue on in my deconversion story for 2013, and this is part 12. And this is another one of those overarching things. And the reason I have to go over this one is when I started this particular blog, I'm going to talk about I was a Christian, and by the end of it, I am not. And it is actually a pretty good chronicle. But I want to talk about my history with blogging in the first place. I got into blogging, writing blogs, being on forums, way back when there was still dial-up internet. My first church, I did some blogging, and I started getting into forums and stuff. And I started blogging in my second church more extensively with things like the Rabyd Theologian, Rabyd Theologian 2.0 and 3.0. I did a blog on open theism. I think I was using Blogger at the time. I did other blogs, and then I went over to WordPress, and I had a bunch of blogs at first. I had one on bodybuilding, I had one on open theism again, something else, I can't remember a lot of them. And I got to a certain point, and I just kind of got fed up with having all these different places I was writing. And, you know, they tell you to, back then, to focus on a certain topic if you want to get people to read, but I got tired of that, and I said, you know what, I want a blog where I can write down my thoughts. And it was about this time that I was also starting to struggle with my faith. And I'll get more into the details of why that was in my next episode when I talk about the beginning days of being a congregational pastor. But at this point in probably late 2012, I was really struggling with all the questions that I had built up and had. And I said, you know what, Ed, I think what you need to do is you need to blog about this struggle, but you need to keep it on the down low because you can't, blogs are public. I said, so what I could do is I could write every day and post it on a blog, and I would have a chronicle of my journey where I could look back and kind of think, okay, what am I dealing with here? And so I started a blog called Thingsrabid. I will link the blog and all the posts on that blog that I talk about in the description. So if you want to go look at some of the things I've done in this blog, you're more than welcome. It's, some of the pictures and stuff are missing because of lack of maintenance and so on and so forth. But all the writing is still there. All that's me writing stuff out. As one person put it, back in the day, I'm a prolific writer. In fact, my early days of doing this blog was taking stuff from my other blogs and slapping it on this one. And so I ended up having a ton of posts very quickly from Rabyd Theologian, Open Theism, all that stuff. And I put them at the beginning. And it was kind of a starting point, okay? And Thingsrabid becomes the blog where I pretty much chronicle, intentionally or unintentionally, my deconversion, because I'm going through this phase in the church where everything starts out really well. I'll talk more about that next week. Then I get to this point in the church and in my personal life where things are not really going that well, and I start to have all these questions. And I have a bunch of other questions. Like in this blog, you'll see different tabs at the top. Like hell and damnation that I wrote about. I wrote about open theism. I'm writing about sin and salvation. I write about controversial topics like God and nudity, God and sex, God and marriage. I'm writing about all these different topics, and that are controversial, that are on the edge, that I have questions about in my brain. I'm dealing with the questions of biblical inspiration, things like that, the real theological, deep dive, because I'm trying to figure this out. And blogging, writing things out like that has always been very helpful to me. It's very therapeutic, for one thing. It really has always helped with my depression and my anxiety, because if I can write it out and I'm also a much more effective communicator, writing in a lot of different ways. So it was a good way for me to take my thoughts that were pretty jumbled and put them into an organized format and then continue to write. I also did a series called Sermon Redux, where I write on the Saturday about the previous week's sermon as a way of preparing for my next week's sermon, because I often preached in series. So there's a tab there with Sermon Redux, and one of those is going to become very important in my discussion today. But I'm blogging about these subjects, and I had my good moments. My favorite series in that is called the Theology Pub, and where I liken theology to alcohol. And the main character is me, okay, personified as a bartender in a theology pub. And I serve theology. I don't serve alcohol, I serve theology. And I make a few observations that will kind of be humorous, but they were really kind of mulling over as serious thoughts in my head. And what the Theology Pub becomes is an allegory of my struggles, okay, of my dealing with the various issues on a personal level. And I have a lot of, good memories. But in that, if you were to go through that series, you would see a couple of things. You'd see my fondness for allegory, my fondness for urban fantasy, stuff like Jim Butcher's Harry Dresden series. You'll also see my fondness for pinup girls, which I had ever since I was a teenager. It was one of my guilty pleasures, let's put it that way. And so when I would do a theology pub, I would find, a pinup girl to go with each theology pub host. And it didn't start out that way. I had other pictures at first, but then the pinup girls just stuck. But the whole idea of the pub was an allegory of my thoughts and emotions that I was going through, and by keeping it allegoricalized, I kept the raw nature of it away from anybody who would read it, including my congregation. I dealt with sensitive topics, and when people at the church would ask me, hey, why'd you write on that? I said, well, I didn't think it was appropriate to bring it up like in church, but if I can write it down and then I can refer people to this blog and the post, they can read what I think, and then they don't have to, we don't have to bring it up in church where it's maybe a little inappropriate. That was particularly true of like marriage and sex and nudity and things like that. The big thing with like the nudity series that I did on that blog, one of those things was an answer to a question a congregation member had, where he had his young lady, this young lady was in college, and her friends were going to go to Jamaica or somewhere where they were going to go to a topless beach. And, all three of her friends were planning on being topless, and she asked her father, well, I don't want to feel left out, so I'm going to do it too. And her father was like, how do I convince her not to do this? Can you give me a Bible verse that will tell her that this isn't okay? And so I started that God and Nudity series mostly in response to that idea, but as I looked through it, I said, I really can't tell you that that's wrong. There's no verse that says that that's a sin, that a woman showing her breasts in public is a sin. So, okay, he didn't like that answer. He wanted me to give ammunition, and I was like, I can't really do that because there's nothing there. If I'm going to be an honest theologian, there's nothing there. And so that became one of the things. The Theology Pub was a great thing. I had some of my best creative writing moments are in the pub. But the big thing, and the thing that we're talking about with deconversion, is a couple of things that happened in the blog. And I spent part of today looking through this blog to find, because there was one thing that has dogged me with my deconversion story, because I've said that I was preaching on, I don't remember the exact sermon, but I was preaching on sin and salvation, or sin in some context, okay? And I remember I had that quote from Dan Barker going through my head. I'm kind of, spoiler alert for tomorrow, for the next, the next couple of episodes of my deconversion story. But if you've listened to my other deconversion story methods on the channel, you already know the story. So I'm not telling anything new. But I was having that quote from Dan Barker around my mind that sin is an imaginary problem, that it's not real. And so salvation through Christ is an imaginary solution to an imaginary problem. And I remember I was preaching something about sin, and that quote was going through my head, and I said, I wish I could remember which sermon it was. So I went back to 2015 because I knew it was in that area, and I found it. There's a sermon I did on May 10th that I wrote about in Sermon Redux on May 16th called The Purity Police. And I was preaching a series of messages called Life at the Crossroads from 1 Corinthians. And I was preaching from 1 Corinthians 5, 1 through 13, and I titled the message The Purity Police. And the main point and thrust of my message was that sin is such a powerful thing that we need to keep the church pure from it. And the story there is that, Paul was really concerned about the fornication inside the church, and even that, he mentioned a case of where a guy basically had slept with his stepmother, okay, and you're not upset about this. You've got to keep the church pure. Sin can destroy it. Little leaven, the whole lump. Sin can destroy the whole thing. And I was really preaching, the dangerousness of sin and the necessity of salvation. And part of keeping salvation was keeping the church pure. And that's when the Dan Barker quote was going through my head. And now I have a sermon to go with the story now from looking back at my blog. I haven't done this before. So this is a new thing, folks. So those of you who have followed the Rabyd Atheist, this is a new part of the deconversion story. I now know the sermon. And I remember it now really well because I was trying to hammer home the point of how dangerous sin was. But I was also in conflict because is sin a real problem? Okay, is it just made up? And I was like, God, you've got to reveal to me the reality of sin here in an empirical sense. How can I, have evidence for this? And by the time they got the sermon done, I hadn't heard from God. And I was really more convinced that Dan Barker was right. And I remember sitting down. And I'll tell you the rest of the story when I go through my congregational, but that's the sermon. I'll leave a link to that sermon redux that I wrote I'd write a redux of my sermons where I'd restate the sermon in written form on the Saturday before I preach my next sermon. So it was kind of that one. So you have this, you now have the sermon, and you now have the moment that I deconverted from Christianity. I still believed in God at that point. I became a deist at that point pretty much. But Christianity had died. It was a cut of 1,000 deaths, but at that point was the true beginning of the end, because over the next month I would go through every doctrine of Christianity and realize sin is not real and it can't be real. And, the redemption of Christ is not real. That's a waste of time. What else is, by the time I was done, because one of my series in this blog is the inspiration of Scripture. You'll find that under Bible or something. And I had gone through all the different versions of inspiration of Scripture, discarded them. Hell and damnation, discarded them. Viewpoints of God, discarded them. Open theism, still had that a little bit, but it was dying very slowly. The last death nails of anything deist or anything died when I started, studying evolution and actual what cosmologists were saying about the Big Bang and that sort of thing. When I started studying that stuff, that's when that died. But this is the moment. May 10th, 2015, I was preaching a sermon called The Purity Police, 1 Corinthians 5, 1 through 13. I was trying to get across the reality of sin and how dangerous it is to the church, while at the same time coming to the painful conclusion that Dan Barker was right, that sin was unreal. It was a biblically made-up thing. And when I got to that point, I sat down, and I'll tell you the rest of the story next week or the week after. But the blog chronicles that, and if you want to go look at that post, you'll see what I'm dealing with. The other point of interest in this blog for my deconversion story is June 2016, and I'll leave a link to that month's posts. And if you understand blogging, posts are in reverse order of date. So you'll get there, it'll be June 30th, and then you'll run down to June 1st at the bottom. It always puts the newest post on top. And if you go down to the bottom and roll up, you'll see a lot of different things. But you'll also note that June 2016 was my sabbatical month. I had decided to take a sabbatical, to take a month off And there was a lot of things going on in my life. I had made an appointment to put my dog down on June 6th, and I just did not want to deal with that and try to be a minister. I had been diagnosed with diabetes. I had a hernia that needed repaired. It was not a good month for my health, and I began to realize that I needed to start concentrating more on me and my health. My son was also getting married that month. He would get married on June 17th. And so there was just a lot going on. But the one thing that you'll see, like I have these sabbatical reports. And the first two items in the sabbatical report are struggling with something. I'm not going to say what it was, but struggling with something. And what it was is the last vestiges of any kind of belief in any kind of God were dying. And I was really struggling with my future and what I needed to do. I was struggling with the church because politically I was in a spot where I'm like, these people need to like let go of their control a little bit and let me be the ministry expert. Even though I didn't believe in God, I was going to try to make a go of it for a couple more years, and I wanted to grow the church, more money. The thing about this church I'll talk about in the post, but I'll get to that later. But it was like this month is pivotal, and you can see that if you read through the posts. You'll see a post about my dog's death. You'll see a post about my son getting married. You'll see a post about some of the things I'm trying to get organized with my health and my writing and all kinds of other things. But the underlying problem of June 2016 is I would go into that month a deist, I would come out of it an atheist. And when I got back to my church in July, I was an atheist pastor. And this is really, really, I'm glad I wrote this all down in my blog, because now I have a record of the process. Because the thing you need to realize while you're reading this blog, anytime you're reading it, I'm going to come to certain theological conclusions, but I'm not buying them myself. But I can't say that because I know that people in my church are reading my blog. I'm putting things in my Theology Pub with my struggles and how I'm thinking about things. And I've got a fantasy kind of thing going with it. There's a point in my writing of that story where it goes kind of from a fun, good time to a real battle. And then the battle gets resolved, okay, and things calm down. And it's at that point that I all had come to the end of this struggle. I was really wrestling with the fact that I was an atheist, and I wasn't wanting to accept it. And now I have a time frame, and I'll leave the link to that month if you want to go read that. That's good for me. But it's like there's a literal chronicle of a month there where I'm making a lot of momentous decisions for myself. By this time, I'm already in school because I know I can't be a pastor much longer. I went back to school partly because of my struggles with faith, but also financial struggles. Ministry had never paid me worth a damn, and this church was no exception. So I was trying to find a way, and I'm still trying to find a way. So it's like I'm at that point where I'm really struggling with stuff, and I come out of it, and I feel a lot better about a lot of issues. I get interested in hiking, which helps my health. I start watching my diet. I start lifting again, and I start reaching out and becoming more focused on me by the end of that month. But what's also going on is I'm losing any semblance I have left of anything spiritual or believing in God or anything. I'm just like, none of this convinces me anymore. There's nothing right here, okay? And a lot of people want to link my struggles personally with my struggles with faith. And yeah, sure, there's a link. But my struggle with faith started way back when, and it was always an intellectual thing. From Bible college on, it was like, why do I believe this? And highs, lows didn't matter. Okay, this was always questions on my mind. And I think that's something that needs to be remembered. And this blogging kind of chronicles that. It's interesting how that blog ended 6 months later. Because the moment I come out of the sabbatical, I'm having a real struggle. I'm like, sooner or later it's going to come out that I don't believe in shit. Okay, and I need to stop writing about this stuff. And you'll see a post on January 20th of 2017 where I moved my writing to the Beagle and the Courtesan, a blog I started. And I'm just, on that blog, I'm just being a creative writer. I'm not writing any theological stuff anymore. I'm not doing it because I think it's all nonsense. And so I'm just, at that point, I'm just trying to work on my creative writing skills. I did a few things there, and then I started another blog which no longer exists for good reasons. I'll talk about that. But blogging my way out of faith is what happened here. And I'll bet if somebody were to go back and analyze all my posts throughout that whole blog, they would see the struggle. I would probably see the struggle. I don't know if I have time to go back and read the whole thing. But it's one of those moments where I began to realize that at the beginning of that blog, I had struggles. I still was a believer. Somewhere along the way, I lost Christianity. Another along, I lost any belief in God. And near the end of that blog, I just stopped writing about theology and Bible. And I just went to church, preached my message, and came home. Went to Bible study, talked about the Bible, went home, but didn't believe any of it. Okay, so, and it was a real stressful moment because I'm like, man, I don't believe anything. And I'm trying to finish up this degree at Ferris in order to make myself something better, which I'm still trying to work on. And I'm doing all these things, realizing, constantly trying after that to keep a secret. But I'll talk more in detail about how that all came about in the next 2 episodes of my deconversion story. We're getting close to the end, and once I get to the end, Saturdays will become Reconstruction Saturday, where I talk about, hopefully I'll start talking about how you can reconstruct after faith, how you can actually do something proactive to help you rebuild yourself and rebuild some of the things that are missing in your life. But I want to continue on with this story. But this is the blogging aspect, how I always keep chronicling things in my life through blogging. And so it's a very important part of my deconversion, particularly those 2 notes of the Purity Police sermon on May 10th that I wrote about on May 16th, and then June 2016 when I took my sabbatical. Those are 2 pivotal events that are recorded in this blog that were kind of watershed moments. And I'll leave the links in the description to read them. Once again, thank you for stopping by. I think that's all for this one. Like, share, subscribe, do the things that you do. You guys are great. Join the nation, hit the join button, buy your citizenship. I can always use more financial support in life and in general. So thank you very much. If you enjoy what I do, help me out. I appreciate it. Keep watching those videos. We're getting closer to those watch hours. Very soon you'll see ads on my channel, and that'll be a good day. Thank you once again for stopping by. Remember to live your best life. And don't waste your time on the trappings of religion or waste your money or your opportunities, but go forward doing something good for yourself and your family. And don't waste your time with God or religion, but go forward with you. And I think you'll be much more happy for it. Once again, thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.